Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the EzeeLinux Show, version 18.14. This is recorded March the 28th, 2018. I'm Joe Collins, your host. We're going to talk about upgrading. Do you really need to do it if you're running Ubuntu or Linux Mint? Also in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about questions that I cannot answer. I get those all the time, and that will be toward the end of the video. Before we jump into all of that, a couple of notes. Yes, it's been a while since I have posted something. This is a weird time in the Linux world. This is when we're waiting on Ubuntu to release a long-term support version. And it creates a little void because not much happens, man. Everybody's just sort of holding their breath, waiting to see what Canonical is going to do. Even people with other distributions of Linux. And so there creates a void, and the people who usually post things about Linux on YouTube and write articles and whatnot, they have to fill that void, and they do it with clickbait. This time around, I have decided that I'm just not going to participate in it. It's kind of like this. I posted it on Facebook that I feel like as I listen to people talk about Linux that I'm at a gathering, and people are having a lot of lively conversation, and the moment that I open my mouth to add something, the subject changes, and then I can't think of anything worthwhile to say. So, a closed mouth gathers no foot. That's what I posted on Facebook, and that's how I feel about it. Another thing I want to point out is that lately I have gotten a big uptick in comments and questions. It's awesome. It really is. But one thing that you don't need to bother to tell me about is a misspelled word in a video. I have dyslexia. I am usually pressed for time when I do these videos, and although I try very hard to scan for and look for misspellings, I miss them. And the typo police, man, they have been out in full force lately. People are sending me comments about typos that are in videos that have been posted for 3 years. Nobody really watches these kinds of videos, and I don't care. I'm not going to redo a video because I got one letter off, all right? Just take it for what it is and move on. If it was perfect, they'd have to pay me more. You know what I mean? So just chill on that, gang. Now, if it's on the web page and you spot a misspelling, please feel free to tell me and I'll go fix it, because that's permanent. But you know, these are videos, and like I said, a lot of people don't even bother to watch them. They just listen. And that's what this video is like, because it's not going to be anything on the screen but a few notes that I put together. So let's jump into our first subject, which is the upgrade process that happens with Ubuntu. The Canonical, the company that distributes Ubuntu, has a very strict release cadence. Once every 6 months, they release a new stable version of Ubuntu. And it usually works like this. For instance, Ubuntu 14.04 was released in April of 2014, so therefore 14.04. And Linux Mint is based on Ubuntu, or at least one kind of Linux Mint. There's Linux Mint Debian Edition, which is based directly on Debian. This does not apply to that particular version of Linux Mint. We're just talking about Ubuntu and Linux Mint today. So what they do now is they release a new version for every new long-term support release from Ubuntu. And then they have point releases in the middle. And we'll get more into that in just a few moments and why that is the way it is. So right now, there are 3 stable versions of Ubuntu that are out there. And I didn't put it in my notes here, but we have Ubuntu 14.04, which is the long-term support release that was released in 2014. That is going to be supported until 2019. The current supported version of Linux Mint, which is based on Ubuntu 14.04, is Linux Mint 17.3, and that will be also supported until 2019. And then we have Ubuntu 18.04 coming along here very soon, and or rather 16.04. 18.04 is coming along, 16.04, duh. Anyway, Linux Mint 18.3, which is the current supported version of Linux Mint based on Ubuntu 16.04, will be supported until 2021. There is also the interim release of Ubuntu. The current one of those is 17.10. That's the latest and the greatest. Not a lot of people move to 17.10 because 17.10 has some issues in it, it was more of an experimental release because that was the first one that Canonical switched to the GNOME 3 desktop. Again, went back to GNOME after shipping with Unity for so many years. So we all knew there was going to be some problems there. But anyway. So what Linux Mint does is they will release point releases that pretty much coincide with the interim releases of Ubuntu. So for instance, they released Linux Mint 18 based on Ubuntu 16.04. When Ubuntu 16.04.1 came along, and that is a dot release within 16.04, and then Ubuntu 16.10 came along, Linux Mint, they released Ubuntu 18.1, and so forth. So that's why we have the point releases in Linux Mint. Yeah, it's confusing, isn't it? It really is. It's like, what are we doing? So anyway, basically, an LTS version of Ubuntu is supported for 5 years. The first 2 years of that release cycle are active, which means that you will get point releases. There will be upgrades. There will be kernel changes. There will be new features that are added. There will be new pieces of software added to the repositories. After that 2 years, right about the same time that the next long-term support version comes along, then it goes into maintenance mode, which means that for the next 3 years, they're not going to be adding a whole lot of new features, big upgrades, things like that, but they will be adding security fixes, and you will get updates for programs that are internet facing. So for instance, you can be running Ubuntu 14.04 right now. You're going to have the latest version of Chrome or Firefox or whatever your browser is that's available to you, and the latest Thunderbird as well. Even though it's, you know, pretty much coming to the end of its support. It's getting very long in the tooth now that it's 4 years old. So it's perfectly okay to run a long-term support release for the entire run of the cycle. However, when that cycle is over and they drop support for it, what happens is the repositories get archived. And when they get archived, they actually move to other locations on the web. They don't go completely away. It's just they take the live repositories down and put them somewhere else. And essentially what that does is it breaks apt. And those archived repositories are not going to get any features added anyway, so it's no point in switching over to them unless you have some really, really good reason for running a non-supported version of Ubuntu, because you're not getting updates after that, and they become very insecure very quickly. So when that 5 years is up, it's time to do something else, for sure. So why should you upgrade? You should upgrade if the new version solves a problem. I mean, if you are running, for instance, Ubuntu 16.04 and it crashes all the time, well, you might want to jump to 18.04 when it comes out. I don't really recommend going to interim releases of Ubuntu. If you're currently running a long-term support release, they're only supported for 9 months, gang, and then you have to upgrade. You have to reinstall, basically, or upgrade in place, one of the two. And so it gets to be a big pain. But if, for instance, you're running 16.04 and something's not working, the new version might fix it for you. The new version offers features that will make your work easier. Maybe you don't like the Unity desktop, but you've been stuck with it. Well, you don't have to worry about it anymore because now they're going to ship GNOME 3. It'll be a new experience in version 18.04. What if you need access to newer programs that are offered in your current installed version? So if you're running Ubuntu 14.04 right now, you're on like LibreOffice 4.3, and the new version of Ubuntu ships with LibreOffice 6. That's a lot of evolution in LibreOffice. So you may want to be like, I got to get off of this, man. I can't deal with it. A lot of people who run the older versions to have that stable base, what they will do is they will end up hooking up a lot of PPAs. And those are private package archives that are run by maintainers. And it's a way that you can get a newer version than is currently in the repositories of Ubuntu. Yeah, now we're getting into complicated stuff again. But people do it all the time. And if you're one of those people that constantly finds yourself having to hook up PPAs, you might want to just move ahead because the version that you're looking for would be available in the repositories. There are risks involved with upgrading almost every time you do it. First of all, missing software or broken software. Unfortunately, this does happen. I noticed when I installed the Ubuntu 18.04 beta, and I've actually been running that for about a month now on another machine, that there's a lot of packages in there that just are gone compared to 16.04. They're not there. Poof, bye, see you later. They're not installed by default, or some of them are not even in the repos. So that's going to be an issue. Now, they haven't come out with the final version yet, but we'll talk about that when that comes along. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're jumping from Ubuntu 16.04, and for instance, let's say that you use gksudo all the time, which is a little package that lets you open a graphic program on your desktop, and you open that program with super user privileges. It's not installed by default in 18.04. It's just not there. It wasn't in 17.10 either. You have to install a package called gksu to get that. That's an issue right there. So that might be something that you have to deal with, is you're going to have to maybe even hook up some PPAs to get some software that's not even in the repos anymore at all. And another thing that happens is regressions. Regressions would mean that something that worked perfectly fine in Ubuntu 16.04 suddenly doesn't work in 18.04 because they broke it. That kind of goes into the broken software thing. But it's usually more system related when we talk about regressions. And yes, this can happen with Linux Mint as well. You can go from like Linux Mint 17.3 to 18.3 and you find that something just doesn't work for some reason, and that's because there's a regression in it. Fortunately, that is not as much of a problem these days as it was, say, 10 years ago in Linux, but there's always the chance. And of course, there's missing features. There are things that are in the Unity desktop. We're talking about using vanilla Ubuntu, but it can happen with any spin, no matter what desktop you have. You could find that when you move to the next version, that something that you used all the time isn't there anymore. In GNOME, you're going to have to hook up a bunch of plugins to get a lot of basic functionality that was in the Unity desktop. It's just the way it is. And that's not so much a problem in Linux Mint, because Linux Mint with the Cinnamon desktop or the Mate desktop, they tend to try and keep things as familiar as possible from release to release. They really think long and hard before they add features, and they are very loath to remove features. So the Cinnamon experience, since it came out, has been very consistent over the years. It's one of the reasons I actually like the Cinnamon desktop, is because it doesn't really change all that much. It is what it is. So those are things to keep in mind. Now, you do need an upgrade strategy. That is very important. If you're going to be using Linux as a daily driver and you're not just playing around with it in a virtual machine, then you really need to put your mind to how you're going to be dealing with moving on, because Linux is ever evolving and nothing stays the same for long. It really doesn't. You're kind of riding a wave when you're working with Linux. It's not like, oh, I'm going to install this and then this is the way it's going to be forever. No, you're going to have to evolve with Linux or it will leave you behind. So you kind of have to think, well, how am I going to deal with it when this comes along later? So for instance, Ubuntu 16.04 users aren't going to be offered the chance to upgrade until Ubuntu 18.04.1 is released. That would be the first major dot revision of Ubuntu 18.04. And that is Ubuntu doing that. You're not even going to see the little box that pops up and says, there's a newer long-term support version available. Would you like to upgrade? It's not going to happen. And that's very smart on Canonical's part to do that, because that first release, when Ubuntu 18.04.0 is going to probably need some fixes. There may be some instabilities in there. There might be some problems. Hopefully they'll get them all ironed out before 18.04.1. And I know one of the things they're trying to figure out is how to do the upgrade process from people who are currently running Unity to GNOME. In the Linux Mint world, I have pretty much made up my mind that I don't even plan to even think about upgrading Linux Mint until version 19.1 is released. So right now I'm running 18.3 and I'm very happy with it. I'm not even going to think about installing Linux Mint until 19.1 comes out, which would be around New Year's of 2019. Usually it'll be just a little bit before that or a little bit later. if everything runs according to schedule as it has in the past. And when coming up with your strategy, you need to ask yourself some questions. I mean, the first thing is, how long are you going to use this particular machine? So, I mean, like if it's an old junk computer that you're probably only going to use for a couple of years anyway, you don't really care. Then you might want to just leave it the way it is. You might want to leave it on Ubuntu 16.04 if it's doing what it needs to do, and it doesn't have any hardware that requires all of the new features that come along. Then just leave it alone. That kind of goes into how specific are your software needs, and that's another question too. Is like, do you really need to be on LibreOffice 6? Is that something that has to happen? Or are you content to sit on LibreOffice 5 point whatever for a while? I personally don't care. I don't see anything in LibreOffice 6 that makes me jump up and down and go, ooh, I really got to have that. I like LibreOffice 5, which is currently being shipped with Linux Mint 18.3. The layout is familiar to me, and I don't have any problems with it. I'm just going to stay right where I am for now. That's not a problem. I can use LibreOffice 6, but there are some things that I'm going to have to get used to, or I'm going to have to customize that I'll have to play with. So is that a big deal to you? Who's going to be using the machine? That's another question. Because if you are setting up a machine for somebody else, you know, like your mom or your significant other who is not necessarily needing a lot from it, and you know, some people are very suspicious of change. They don't like to be upgraded. It's like, no, this is the way I like it. So you probably want to keep that running the way it is for as long as you can. And how willing are you to troubleshoot problems that come with new software and upgrades? That's another thing. I mean, if you are a real geek and you are into everything new and shiny, you want to be out there on the bleeding edge, well, go have at it. Upgrade, reinstall, do whatever you got to do. I mean, if you're willing to deal with those problems, then have at it. But if you are doing it for somebody else, or if you are somebody who really just wants to sit down at the computer and have it work, then being a generation or two behind hardware and software wise probably won't bother you too much, because it'll be nice and stable. So there's just things to think about if you're going to be looking at all the new and shiny things coming along and all the upgrades that will be available. So I hope this video helps some folks out there who are new to understand that, you know, take advantage of those long-term support cycles. You know, don't jump into, if you get comfortable with something, don't jump into something else that's going to present a lot of problems, because if that happens, you know, it can be very frustrating. Very frustrating. It's always just fun to move from one version to the next. And that really doesn't matter what operating system you're running at all. It could be Windows or it could be Mac. I mean, the horror stories from upgrading from Windows and Mac are much worse than Linux, let me tell you. Whew. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that garbage anymore since I'm in the Linux world. So there you go, gang. Those are my thoughts on upgrading. And, you know, whatever you want to do with your computer is fine. But just because you see somebody who's going, ooh, ah, wow, that is so cool, that does not necessarily mean that you have to be hip, you know, be like all the cool kids that are moving on. You can stay right where you're at and use what works for you. I'm big on that. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about at the end of this video, and we're going to change subjects now. So if you want to pause and go get a drink or go and run to the restroom or whatever you got to do, you can do that now. I'll wait. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about are frequently asked questions that I can't answer. And let me make this a little bit bigger so it's easier for me to see and you to see as well. Okay. First of all, let me explain that I get a lot of questions. I mean, that's what I do. Most of my interactions with people in the EzeeLinux community are one-on-one. Either I get, you know, you can send me a message on Facebook. I don't like those particularly because I find that hard to work with. You can send me an email directly through the Contact Us page. That's probably the best way to go if you want to get my attention, because I'm constantly looking at the email. And then, of course, you could send me a message or something here on YouTube. And YouTube comments, gang, I mean, I get thousands and thousands of them, and I do my best to try and read through all of them. But it's getting to a stage where that's not possible. So I kind of have to pick and choose, and I kind of have to look for question marks. So just letting you know, if you post a YouTube comment and you go, well, that jerk didn't talk to me, he didn't respond, it's just because there are so many that come up lately, which is, I mean, that's a good problem to have, but just be aware of that. I'm just letting you know. So anyway, I get these questions, and a lot of times I try and help people, but some questions I just cannot answer at all. So I wanted to kind of go through this a little bit. One of the questions I get all the time is how to set up a VPN. And I can't answer that question because every VPN provider does it differently, and they should provide very clear instructions on how to set it up on your Linux distribution. And if they don't, then you need to go find another VPN. They should make it very easy for you. I don't really need a VPN. I don't bother with VPNs. That's something that you'll have to go look at for yourself. So that's one I get a lot. Samba shares with Windows. That's another thing that people ask me about all the time. I don't run Windows in any way, shape, or form. I do not have a machine available to me that runs Windows. So I cannot set up, test, or work with anything that involves Windows and Linux getting, interacting. I just can't. So I can't do a video about it. I hate Samba. I have always hated Samba. Many years ago, like probably 3 or 4 years ago, I posted a video, and this was back when I still had some Windows 7 VMs running, and I did have one machine that had a Windows 7 drive in it. I posted a video about how to set up a very quick and dirty Samba share, and it's an insecure share, but if you just absolutely have to share files between those machines, you can seek that out. But as far as like Samba with Windows 10, no, I don't know anything about it, and I cannot help you. And what I use for file sharing on Linux is SSH. I use SSH, SFTP, and SSHFS, which does everything that Samba does and works through the terminal a lot of the time, and also works with the, you can set up an SSHFS share with most Linux file manager programs. Super easy to do as long as you have SSH up and running on the machine. And I've got videos on how to set up SSH. I've got a mammoth video where me and Jeremy O'Connell went through everything you ever wanted to know about SSH. So if you want to learn how to use it, and there's just super great documentation out there about SSH as well. You don't need Samba, and you don't need Windows either. So there you go. Which leads me to my next thing, is that dual booting issues. People ask me about dual booting issues all the time. Let me make this perfectly clear. I don't like dual boots. I don't support dual boots, and I can't help you with a dual boot. I think a dual boot is more trouble than it's worth. Now, if you are a computer whiz and you have been able to make dual boots work for you, every time I say this, somebody out there says, well, I've dual booted for the last 15 years and I've never had a problem. Well, the reason why you haven't had a problem is because you understand how it works. A dual boot, for somebody who is not very familiar with how a computer works and how the bootloader works and how partitions on drives work, can be a disaster area. So I just avoid them, and I do not recommend them. If you want to dual boot, you're doing that at your own risk, especially with later versions of Windows. The last time that I even attempted a dual boot was with Windows 7 on a non-UEFI machine. And I figured out pretty early on, trying to work with clients who wanted to, for whatever reason, dual boot with Windows 10, that this was not a good idea. So I don't recommend them. I don't like them. I think the best way to experience Linux is Linux installed on its own machine. It doesn't have to be an expensive machine. It could be one that you picked up at the Goodwill that's refurbished or bought off of eBay or whatever. It could be a 5-year-old laptop, but it's still a better experience than trying to dual boot. So, and if you absolutely positively have to have Windows just for games, then use have a machine around just to do that and treat it as a console. In other words, do everything else on Linux and then play your games on Windows. That's the way I look at it, okay? Just letting you all know right up front. Server enterprise related questions. That is something that I don't work with. I work with desktops and a home environment most of the time. and I'm not really into that. What I do with those questions usually is send them to Jeremy O'Connell at CyberWeb Solutions. If you do a search for CyberWeb Solutions on Google, his site will pop up, and you can ask him directly if you want to. He offers those kinds of services, and he is way smarter about that sort of thing than I am. Running Windows software in Wine or Crossover. I do not use or do not recommend Wine. And it is there's a lot of reasons for that. And number one is I have put myself in a philosophical place where I want absolutely positively nothing to do with Windows. I detest Windows, and I don't want to deal with anything Microsoft related. So therefore I don't. So therefore I don't have the experience, and I don't do it. When I first switched over to Linux full time, I ran Wine for a little while. I ran 3 or 4 programs in Wine, and I figured out pretty quick that this was a hack, and that it was making my system unstable, and it didn't play well with some of the upgrades that were coming in. And Wine is very difficult to restore if your system gets messed up because of the way that it interacts. It also makes you vulnerable to Windows malware and viruses. If you have anything running on Wine that is internet facing, then your Linux system is pretty much just as at risk for infection from a Windows or malware or virus as if you were just running Windows. So I got rid of that pretty soon, and I don't really mess with it. I mean, if it's something that you absolutely have to have, good luck with it. Not for me. People ask me about RAID or LVM storage systems. Well, first of all, RAID systems are going to depend a great deal on your hardware. I don't have that hardware, so I can't really tell you what to do with it. That's something you're going to have to go look at the documentation for your hardware. Software RAID in Linux is something that I have looked at a little bit, but it falls into the category of LVM, which is a very complicated way to deal with drives and partitions. And for most newbie users and average users out there, it is over their heads and overcomplicated, and it is a difficult thing to work with even for people who are relatively well versed in how computers work. So I really can't help you because I don't mess with them, and I don't recommend people set it up. It's usually more trouble than it's worth in a home environment. And finally, complex hardware video related issues. Now this is something that I get questions on all the time, where people have these really unorthodox setups, and they want to do things like, oh, I want to install a Linux on a USB external drive, but have it be a full installation. I'm not going to, it's not very limited that I can tell you to do with that limited amount of information that I can give you. That's not the way I run Linux. Like I said, going back up to the thing about dual boots, it should be on its own machine. I mean, computers are cheap, folks. And the other thing that falls into this category will be people who go, well, I have a 10-year-old such and such printer that I'm trying to get to work on Linux. Can you help me install the drivers? No, I can't. If the machine's not supported or the drivers are garbage, then there's not much that I'm going to be able to do to help you. Buy a new printer, for Christ's sakes. Just please. I mean, it's like people try and get really old hardware that's not well supported to run on Linux. It's very frustrating, and they get frustrated and they're like, why doesn't that work? It's like, because it doesn't. So find something else, Get something that's going to be easy. Buy an HP printer that you plug in and the drivers just automatically install. Stop trying to beat your head against a wall to keep something that you paid maybe $50 for 10 years ago going. It's like, it doesn't owe you anything. Save up and buy a printer. It's very frustrating for me. And so, I mean, stuff like that. I mean, and generally speaking, I don't want to sound like an ogre, but I mean, it's just... I try and point people in the right direction if I can, but there are some questions that I can't answer and I'm just not getting into, and that's just a list of them right there. It's just things to keep in mind. Now, before you send a question, first of all, you need to read the manual. That's what RTFM stands for. Didn't you know that? Read the manual. Check out the man command. If you're using something from a command line and it's not working the way you have it typed in, read the information that pops up with man or the info pages. Your computer, even the most basic install comes chocked with documentation. It might not be the best in the world, but it is there. So check that first. Distribution documentation and wikis. You need to be very familiar with your distribution's wiki. All of them have it. They have a forum. They have something. Bookmark those pages. And if you come across something that you don't understand, look it up on the wiki. A lot of times, what I do when people ask questions is I go look it up on the wiki and I say, oh, this is what it is, and point them to that article. That's what I'm doing. So ask Mr. Google, because that is where I'm getting a lot of the information. I'll be quite honest with you. Most of the questions that come in, somebody will say, will Linux run on this particular piece of hardware? Well, what I'll do is I'll go take the name of the hardware, and then I'll say, how does Linux run on this piece of hardware? And I will Google that, and then I find the answer that I'm looking for, and I send it to them. You could do it yourself. Google, and do a little research first. It's really quite easy to do. Play with the wording. It might not come up the first time. You might have to reword it 2 or 3 different ways. But that's what I do. A lot of the time is just find that out. Another thing is that when you are sending questions, send me some info to work with. If you send me a 2-line message that says, Linux Mint will not boot on my machine, can you help me? I can't. I don't know what you're talking about. What Linux Mint are you running? Are you running Linux Mint 18.3 based on Ubuntu? Are you running Linux Mint Debian Edition? Version 2 based on Debian? What kind of machine is it? I don't know. I mean, and sometimes I have time to pump you for information and go, oh, could you please, tell me a little bit more? And sometimes I don't. So it's like, if you want to get an answer, and this, by the way, doesn't just apply to me, it applies to a lot of the Linux community, these things. Do your research first, know what you're talking about, and when you do send your message, make sure that you have pertinent info. System info, error messages, software version, all that stuff. It needs to be put there, because even if what I'm going to do is go search for information, the more specific information I have, the more likely I am to come up with a fix that I can point you to. Be concise and be patient, because first of all, when I say be concise, put the information necessary in the message. A lot of people want to tell me their life story, and they want to talk about their experiences with Linux and how long they've been using it, and so we get paragraph and paragraph and paragraph and paragraph before we even get to the question, and that becomes really tedious, because I can deal with as many as 20 of these a day, gang. And so get me the information I need. I understand. I've heard it so many times about how wonderful Linux is, and I've really like it since I left Windows and all that stuff. I don't need to hear it again. It's just kudos. Go ahead. Just say ditto or something. Remember there was a talk show host, I don't even know if he's still on the air in America, that was named Rush Limbaugh, and he was, conservative talk show host. And one of the funny things that he did was he didn't allow anybody to ever say, "Oh, we like you, Rush. We love your show." He just people call up and go, "Dittos." That's it. Hey, we all love Linux. If you're here, so you can just do dittos, I guess. I hope Rush Limbaugh doesn't sue me for stealing his idea there. Most of you who are watching this in other countries don't even know what I'm talking about. And finally, one of the things I just went through with a fellow that I have been working with for a long time is he did something to his computer where it wouldn't boot. And the funny thing about it is that I said, do you run time shift? And this is in Linux Mint 18.3. And he says, why, yes. I said, restore it. And of course it fixed the problem. I said, don't forget about, don't forget about time shift. You're sitting there and it's like all of a sudden you run into some major disaster. And if you're running Linux Mint 18.3 and you have time shift set up, just roll back. Just roll back to a day when it worked and then rerun the updates again and see what happens, man. A lot of times that fixes the problem. And if you're running Ubuntu, whatever Ubuntu spin you want to be on, you need to check out a program called CYA, which is Cover Your Assets. You can find that at EzeeLinux.com. That's a program that Jeremy O'Connell wrote and I helped contribute to. And that allows you to roll back to states of your system that were functioning before you broke it. Same thing that time shift does. Timeshift just happens to be baked into Linux Mint 18.3, so I kind of recommend that if you're running Linux Mint that you might want to use Timeshift over CYA, but either one will work. Sort of like System Restore in Windows is what that does. So there you go. I hope that helps a little bit. This is probably not going to stem the flow of questions from people who will ask about these things, because that would have meant they watched the video. But I'm just kind of putting it out there because, you know, if you're sitting there going, you know, thinking to yourself, well, I can ask Joe a question in the future, just keep these things in mind, okay? So there you go. And we come to the end of another lovely episode of the EzeeLinux Show. Thank you, everybody, for your support. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for your subscriptions here on YouTube. Just before I did this video last night, the 27th of March, I happened to notice we crossed 48,000 subscribers. That's amazing. I cannot wait to get to 50,000, and it's going to happen sooner than later. So remember to share the videos and tell your friends about it. Spread the word about EzeeLinux and Linux in general, because it's all community driven. It's all about you, and as far as I'm concerned, the more the merrier. You want to be a part of it, jump right on in. And be sure to give EzeeLinux a like on Facebook. That is, if you're continuing to use Facebook. I know there's a lot of controversy swirling around Facebook right now. We'll just see how that shakes out. Also, check out EzeeLinux.com. And there on that page you will find software, you'll find the latest news about videos being posted. It's kind of a clearinghouse, and got some wallpapers and things to look at. So check that out. And also check out freedompenguin.com for more about Linux. A lot of great people contribute to freedompenguin.com, and a lot of content that's available, you know, like my content is syndicated there. The Linux Gamer shows up there. There's a lot of other people who are syndicated there and contribute to it, so it's a good page. Matt Hartley runs the freedompenguin.com webpage, and he's a good guy. He's one of the people in the Linux world that I look up to. So do check it out if you would. And we will do this again soon. Thank you for watching. See ya.